All right, so we are wrapping up the series you saw, Enemies of the Heart. And this has been really been a challenge for me, and I've heard a lot of good feedback from a lot of you guys about how they've been hitting home. And some of the enemies of the heart that we've talked about guilt, we talked about anger, we talked about greed. And today we're wrapping it up, and we're talking about jealousy. And last week, if you were here, we mentioned the idea that greed, for instance, is sort of difficult to diagnose in ourselves. I don't meet too many people, you probably don't either, that say, yeah, I'm greedy. I struggle with greed. We might meet people who say, yeah, I struggle with anger, and they're open and honest about it because it's sort of hard to hide that, because when it blows up, right? And even about guilt, we don't necessarily hide that. Sometimes our guilt can sort of own us, and so it may be something we talk about even too much, about the guilt that we feel, and we're not necessarily ashamed because we know that everybody feels guilty. But the last two, the one last week, greed, and now jealousy, they're really difficult to diagnose and look in the mirror and say, hey, I'm jealous. I mean, can you admit that? But let's think about this. Have you ever been a little bit perturbed by your sister who fits in size 4 jeans? Guys, probably not. I don't think you want to fit in size 4. But we're not alone. You see, guys, we have some things that we get jealous about. Maybe you guys have been jealous or a little bit upset with your buddy because he's got 6-pack abs and you've got a keg. Anybody can relate to that? Might be a pony keg, but it's a keg nonetheless. Maybe, just maybe, you're happy for your neighbor's new car in their driveway, but you wonder why you can't have one too. Can you relate to any of that? Does any of that sort of hit a twinge on you and make you say, yeah, maybe there's some jealousy in my life? You know, deep down, you know you shouldn't feel this way. You know you shouldn't. You don't want to feel this way. You try your best not to. You don't want it to affect the way that you treat the person, but sometimes it does. Sometimes when you see them out and about, you'll turn and go the other way, acting like you didn't see them. Anybody else do that? Y'all lying, I know you do it. We struggle with it. We let it affect how we treat people. And you continually get reminded that he or she has something that you don't. Or you've got something that they don't that you wish you didn't have. The point is, there's an inequity. There's something that's not equal that God could have made right. You're like, I want this. They got it. Why can't I have it too? It's fine if they have it, but I want it. Maybe you think if you weren't so big-boned, you'd feel better about bathing suit season. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you think if my male pattern baldness hadn't hit so early, my poor self-esteem might not be holding me back. Maybe you think that. Maybe you think if I'd been more attractive as a teenager, I wouldn't have sat home as much on Friday nights, and I got some dates, and I'd have more friends. Maybe you think if you had more athletic ability, then maybe, just maybe, you got a scholarship and the whole trajectory of your life would have changed. It would have changed your future. And then maybe you think if I'd been better with my communication skills, I might would have gotten that raise, I might would have gotten that promotion at work, and things would be different right now. And it often can leave you wondering, what was God thinking? You know, that's bold to say that, but you probably have had that thought cross your mind. Why, God? Why don't I have what they have? Or why do I have this thing that holds me back and they don't have it? It seems like their life is so easy. You see, your problem isn't with your neighbor. Your problem's with God. My problem's with God. I may have hard feelings toward my neighbor because they've got something that I want that I just don't have. But my problem and your problem, when you have those feelings, those struggles, those feelings and those struggles are against God. And that's something we're going to look at and we're going to dig in. And I'll be honest, it's not going to always be real comfortable. But we've got to look at it. We've got to dig in and see what God has to say to us and what he wants us to do. You see, the truth is, most of us probably would not sort of speak to God and say, you know, God, what were you thinking? We're probably not going to say it out loud very often. And if we say it out loud, like in a prayer, we'd probably do it more from a confession standpoint. God, forgive me for feeling this way, but come on, really? You know, really? Look at me. You know, if I'd have been 6'3", I'd have been in the NBA, right? That's what we think. We think those things. Why couldn't I have what he has? Or why couldn't I have what she has? You probably wouldn't say it out loud, but probably deep down, you may be holding a grudge against God. Chances are, if you're feeling a little uncomfortable as you hear that voiced, there's probably something that needs to be rooted out. There's probably something that's probably sticking in there and it's holding on, and it's this enemy in your heart that you got to get removed. Now, most of us believe, honestly, we believe it, we'll say it, that we owe God everything. And the idea for God to owe us, it seems absurd. And it is. It really is. But we definitely wouldn't want to say it out loud. And that's why our feelings of jealousy are so easily directed on other people. Because we feel like a crazy person saying, God, I'm upset with you because I don't have this. So what do? We find somebody to take our hard feelings out, either privately or maybe even publicly, because they have something that we don't have. So we blame other people for what we want or what we have that we wish we didn't. But let me ask you this. Can your friend make you skinnier? If they're skinnier, can they make you skinnier? No, they can't. Can your star athlete brother make you more coordinated? No, there's nothing they can do to help you or fix it. Can your Harvard-bound cousin, can they make you a better test taker? Nope, they can't do that for you. You've got to work it out. You've got to increase your knowledge, whatever. What if your neighbor bought you a car like his? Would it actually help? You'd probably be madder, wouldn't you? Because look at him. What does he think I am, a charity case, right? You'd be mad because it makes you look bad, it makes you look small, but all the while you want the car just like they have. It's fine if they have it, but you want it too. The only thing the haves can do to make the have-nots feel better is to lose what they have. Y'all felt that too, huh? I felt it while I was writing, and I felt it while I just said it. That's deep down what we often struggle with, am I right? You know, the only thing that would truly make us feel better, and we don't like saying it because it makes us sound really bad, but the only thing that would make it better is if they don't have it too. If I don't get one, I don't want you to have one either. We don't like saying it out loud, but deep down that's what's going on. We hate that we feel that way. But to be honest, have you ever experienced a little pleasure when someone who is maybe better off financially than you suffers a little setback? Y'all ain't going to say on that, are you? Nope. But yeah. Or maybe your neighbor's kid's ball team finally loses and you don't have to hear any more about how they're undefeated, right? Or maybe your sister-in-law didn't look quite as good this past summer at the beach, right? Come on now, tell the truth and let the Lord love you. You know, we struggle with those kind of things. Have you ever felt that way? Me neither. No, I haven't either. I've heard tales of small-minded people who have struggled with that kind of thing, though. But here's the thing. It feels bad to feel good in situations like that, doesn't it? You know, you kind of are happy about it, but then you're like, what am I thinking? Am I really that bad of a person that I take joy in somebody else having a struggle or a setback or gaining a few pounds or losing a couple of bucks? I mean, am I really that small of a person? And it feels bad. But those extra pounds of your family member or the failures of your neighbor will never, ever eradicate your pain. They'll only alleviate it for a short while, right? The problem that this causes is until you get jealousy out of your heart, until I get jealousy out of my heart, you'll never be able to allow the most basic but important command. Jesus said to love one another. But if you have jealousy rooted in your heart, you'll never be able to be truly capable to love the way he said. Because he said to love like I have loved you. Love completely sacrificially. But when jealousy has a place in your heart, it's going to control you and it's going to keep you from loving the way he loves you. So how do you root this enemy out of your heart? How do you get this enemy to get its grip off of your soul and keep dragging you down into that pit? You have to start with a simple mantra, if you will. My problem is me. All right? I want you to count to three. I want you to say this together. All right? 1, 2, 3. My problem is me. How many of y'all whispered you? My problem is me. If I realize this, if you realize this, and we own this, it'll start to help turn the tides of jealousy in our lives. You see, James, the brother of Jesus, wrote what we call the book of James in the Bible, and he says it clearly in James chapter 4, verse 1. We've got the scripture on the screen. It's a little dark in here today because of clouds, so I won't even ask you if you need a paper Bible. You can look on the screen with us or on your phone. James chapter 4, verse 1 says this, "What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you?" All the quarrels, all the fights, all the hard feelings that we have, they come from the desires and the things that are fighting in us. We are the issue with most of our heartache in our lives. I know people do you wrong. I'm not saying that. Don't go off on that tangent and argue with me in your head. But what I want you to know is this. Most of our struggles come from what we want. And most of the arguments that we have come from what we want. We are the source of, honestly, almost every conflict in our lives. Now, the other person across from you, they're also the source of the conflict. They're not off the hook, but we are the source of most of the conflicts in our lives. We want something, but we do not get it. We want something, but we do not get it. Look at verse 2. It says, you desire, but do not have, so you kill. Whoa, now, James, back up, buddy. What kind of church were you a part of? That's kind of what you think. But if you look at what Jesus taught, if you look at what he said, he compared hate to what? Murder. And so maybe, just maybe it's a physical murder, but it also can be sort of an emotional, spiritual murder. And it leads to the quarrels and the fights. We covet but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and you fight. Now, that kill may be hyperbole, but isn't it true that most murders are committed because somebody did not get something or someone that they wanted? I mean, isn't that why a lot of murders, crimes of passion especially, take place? You see, most murder investigations begin with friends and family, unfortunately. That's the first place they look to see if there are ties there, because it happens more than we'd ever like to admit. You're not getting your way, so what do? You kill. Whether it be commit a murder or you start to murder their character and you start to wish ill will towards them and you rejoice more and more when they struggle and when bad things happen to them. So you aren't getting your way, so you kill. And that word covet there, that word covet is listed there in verse 2 in James chapter 4. It gives the idea of hotly pursuing. Does anybody remember the old show Dukes of Hazzard? You remember Roscoe? Hot pursuit. You remember that? It's like you're chasing after it. You want nothing more than to catch that thing or get that thing. You strive after it. But here's the thing. The other word that's in there a little bit earlier in verse 2, the word desire, is understood as to lust for, to yearn for, to want more than anything. So you got these two words, to desire and to covet. But the problem is, 9 times, if not 10 times out of 10, the things that we desire, the things that we covet, are unquenchable in our thirsts. We might get a taste of them, but we always want more. It's never enough, or it never fulfills us the way that we thought it would. Am I right? Am I saying anything that's not true? Am I saying anything that it's not a struggle for most of us? You see, we want more stuff, but does our stuff ever make us completely happy forever? No, because our stuff gets old. I talked about it a little bit last week. Our stuff gets old. If we want money, we always want more, and is it ever enough? I remember the old quote about a famous billionaire was asked, and I can't remember, it was one from many, many years ago. I believe it was one of the Rockefellers. They asked him, how much money is enough? And he said, just $1 more. Because that's always the answer, just $1 more, just $1 more, just $1 more. It's an unquenchable thirst. We always want more success. If we have success, it's never enough because it's too fleeting and it goes away quickly. We always want more progress. We want to move a little farther, a little faster. We always want more intimacy. We always want more sex. We always want more fun, more relationships, more recognition. We want all because it's unquenchable. So we lust after it, we covet after it, we desire it. And C.S. Lewis said this, appetites grow through indulgence, not neglect. Gluttons think just as much about food as starving people. And that's probably very true, is that the more we have, the more we want. And we can feel just as and think just as much about food if we're starving as also we have too much food. And if you think about it this way, every relational struggle can be reduced to the other person trying to satisfy their desire in a way that conflicts with you trying to fulfill your desires. Okay, that's kind of wordy, but here's what I want you to think. If you doubt that or you don't understand the phrase I'm saying here, think about this. Think about parking spaces. Anybody do Black Friday shopping? Y'all aren't willing to admit it? Okay, that's good. A couple of y'all. All right. Well, regardless of whether you do Black Friday shopping or not, if you've ever been out at a store that's crowded and the parking lot's crowded and you're looking for a parking space and you see one and you start to, you fly around, you go around and you get there and all of a sudden at the same time, another car is coming from the same direction and they are trying to get what? your space, right? And you get there and there's like a little bit of a standoff for just a second or two, and somebody has got a cave, and the first thing in your mind is, that jerk is trying to take my parking space. What is the person in the other car thinking? That jerk is trying to take my parking space. Every conflict that we have, if you want to boil it down and get really simple, can be sort of described as that. A conflict happens because my desires are trying to be met and their desires are trying to be met, but the problem is they're not trying to meet their desires in a way that meets my desires, and vice versa. And we have to realize that that is the struggle that's within us. Our desires don't get fulfilled and we want to blame, right? We want to blame people. We want to blame somebody else. And see, to blame is to acknowledge dependence. To blame is to acknowledge dependence on somebody else. So what we're saying when we blame other people is, my happiness depends on you. That's a scary place to be. Because until we learn this truth from God and learn this truth from James, we have no choice but to try to squeeze our contentment from other people while they try to squeeze theirs from us. And everybody ends up suffocating. Are you following with me on this? You see, that's the struggle that we have, because we want to find our contentment, we want to find our joy, we want to find our satisfaction, our fulfillment in other people, and we will struggle every single time if we're looking for it in other people, in other things, in other places. We will never be satisfied. And if you think, what right does James have to talk? Yes, God's the ultimate author of the Bible, but what right does James have to talk about being jealous? Who did we say his brother was? Jesus. He's the half-brother of Jesus. Do you think he ever had a struggle of saying, man, I wish I was like Jesus? It says earlier in the Gospels that he and the rest of his family did not believe who Jesus was. They actually thought he was crazy. But there came a time, I believe the resurrection probably did it. They saw him die on the cross and they saw him raised from the grave. I believe that's what really changed everything. He became one of the most devout followers of his brother. And you think about that. You know how your brother's a knucklehead, right? You don't want to worship him and say he's the king of the universe. But this is what he did. And so do you think he has some authority to speak on jealousy? Yes, absolutely. And so until we learn that truth, it's going to be a struggle. And here's the problem. When you're looking to another person to fulfill everything for you, you're never going to be content. Listen to what James says in verse 2, the part B, if you will. You do not have because you do not ask God. How many relationships, I'm talking personal, just friends, love, business, any of these relationships, how many of them could have been saved or be better if we asked God for our fulfillment rather than the person we continually butted heads with? Think about that. How many relationships that you're in right now would be automatically better if you started every day to make sure that you receive your fulfillment from God and not from that other person that you want to fulfill every desire and every need for you? So we should have been praying, and we should be praying. And if you are, that's good. Keep praying. But have you ever prayed and it didn't really improve? I believe the answer is yes. Look at verse 3. When you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. Has your prayer ever sounded a little bit like this? Dear God, please change their heart so I can get what I want. Now, you might not have worded those. Don't be trying to play a technicality on me and say, I didn't say those words exactly. Don't be my child. But have you ever worded something sort of like that? Dear God, change their mind, change their heart so I can get what I want. You see, that's what James is saying. You may be asking with improper or impure motives because you may be wanting something selfish. You may be wanting something good. Don't discredit what we're talking about here. But here's something you need to learn. I, as well as you, need to listen to what Peter says as well in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. He says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. You see, all, I even put that on there, all, every single one, every anxiety, every care, every worry, every single one we're to cast on God. Those are the things. We're to go to him with our wants and with our needs. And you may think, well, I'm supposed to just ask for needs. He knows what you're thinking. He knows the wants. He knows the desires. So go ahead and honestly tell him. Lay those things at his feet, every single one. Because here's a lesson that you and I have to learn. If it's important to you, then it's important to God. If it's important to you, it's important to God because you are important to God. I'm important to God. So everything that's on your heart, whether it may be right or it may be wrong, give it up to God and lay it at his feet. Because once you've confessed and opened up these things to him, then you can have some healing, and you take all your cares, all your worries, all your fears, and you lay them at his feet. It's going to be easier to deal with people. It's going to be easier to deal with people. And what they do or don't do for you will become less important because you'll start to find peace in God alone. And so what they do or don't do will have less impact on you. Because here's why. Because you'll finally begin to be done with trying to find your self-worth and your fulfillment in other people. You see, there's only needs that only God can meet. There are needs that only God can meet. And if you finally stop looking for people to meet the needs that only God can meet, you'll start to find peace. But here comes the sneaky part. When you tell God everything and you give it to him, he'll begin to shape your desires to match more what is in line with his word. Have you ever realized, looking back, that it was a really good thing that God did not give you what you wanted maybe several years back or several weeks back? You ever had that little shining light of wisdom? I'll tell you, when I was growing up, my dad he's been a car guy. He was a mechanic, and he always had some really nice cars. And he had, this won't mean anything to some of you, but he had a 69 El Camino. That's like that old truck car thing. And a lot of those were ugly, but the 69 was a beautiful machine because it looked just like the front end of a 69 Chevelle, which is arguably one of the best looking muscle cars in the United States. I mean, you may have a different opinion, but it's up there, right? But so it's this beautiful car. It was black. It was bad. He was a mechanic, so it was something. And this won't mean anything to I got to tell you, for guys that know or ladies that know, it had a 396 big block Chevy engine in it. I mean, this was a light vehicle with a big motor, and I was 15 years old, and I was salivating every day I saw it. I was like, that's going to be mine, and I was just so excited. I'm just being honest. And I was just so ready, and you know what my dad did right before I turned 16? Sold it. I'm still bitter. I mean, it bugged me. But you know what? Now I do have the wisdom to realize it's a good thing that my dad did not allow me to drive that vehicle as a 16-year-old. Because I can honestly say there probably would not be Movement Church because there probably wouldn't be Bobby. There'd be a memorial stone somewhere. I mean, I'm serious. I mean, it's the truth. And I didn't realize it at the time, and I was so upset. I was really bothered. I was like, why? That was perfect, right? I was going to be cool. And I was just upset. But I realized it's a good thing that my father did not give me what I wanted because he knew what I needed better. And thankfully, I learned to drive and become a driver in a car that would not do hundreds of miles an hour, and break the sound barrier. Thank goodness I learned that. And God loves you and I too much to give you everything that we want. God loves you too much to give you everything you want, and everything you ask for. And honestly, he loves everyone around you too much to give you everything you want and everything you ask for. Because some of those things would ruin your relationships when you ask for them. It would ruin the relationships with other people. But he still wants you to ask. And the question, of course, is why? Because I do believe God wants us to learn a valuable lesson. And we find that in James chapter 1, verse 17. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. You see, God wants you and I to learn. He wants us to learn this valuable lesson that he supplies all good things, not all wished for things. He gives us every good and perfect gift. And he wants us to learn the difference between the bad, the good, and what's best. And to learn to ask for what's best and to be happy with what's best rather than asking for bad things all the time or even sometimes settling for good things when we could have the best if we just trust his timing. Jealousy is so dangerous because it shapes our attitudes towards other people. It shapes our attitudes towards other people. And it's difficult to actively love someone if you're holding resentment in your heart because you're jealous of them. And that's the problem, is that jealousy breeds resentment. It leads to resentment every time. And here's why it's so deadly. Since resentment needs justification, we're going to go looking for justification until we find it. And then we're going to feel good about our resentment. You know what I'm saying? If we don't have something we want, we're jealous of it, we're going to resent that person who has that thing that we wish we had, and we're going to then take note of their life, and every time they get something or they prove that they don't deserve it, we're going to say, there's another mark. And we're going to resent that person, we'll become angry at them. We may even come to the point of hating. So the question that you have to ask is this: who am I jealous of? No one? Maybe you can't put a name to it, and maybe that's the truth. But maybe, just maybe, there's a certain type of people that you resent. Do you resent CEOs of big companies? Do you resent actors, rich people, professional people, marrieds, singles, parents? Do you resent children? Do you resent happily married people? Do you resent retirees? Do you resent a certain type of people? You see, if you dig around long enough, you might begin to see that there are certain types of people that you resent simply because they have something that you want, or they don't have something that you wish you could get rid of. And it probably all started with one individual one time in your past. And because of that, you resent all types of people in that category. But let's get back to God real quick. Once you've uncovered the source of this pain and the source of this jealousy, you gather up all the mess. You gather up your old beater car that you wish you had one like your neighbors. You take your straight or your curly hair, whichever you wish you had or didn't have. You take your expanding waistline and your shrinking bank account, and you take all these things, these dead-end jobs that you've had, and you can never get the right job, and you give all of it to God. You give it all to God. All the associated anger, all the hurt, all the worries, and you let him have it. You let him have it. You say, God, here it is, and you name that stuff, and you say, God, here it is, I'm giving it to you. And then you sum it up like this: Lord, I think you owe me. And then you watch out for the lightning bolt. Thankfully, God doesn't operate that way. But the reason I said that is because if the thought of verbalizing that, Lord, I think you owe me, makes you feel really uncomfortable, then you're on the edge of a breakthrough. Because you're realizing something. You're realizing this. Through the Old Testament even, and especially the New Testament, God is sending this message that without his son Jesus, we're all lost completely and utterly. And he's sending this message that I'm working a plan in the Old Testament. I'm working a plan to send a Savior to you so that you don't have to pay the punishment for your sin. And you are going to be able to be set free through the blood of my son Jesus and through his resurrected life. And you were once enemies of God. You had no hope. You were done. You were finished. You were kaput. But God gave us what we needed and we never could deserve. You see, when we own this truth, it all starts to become clear. It all starts to become clear. God doesn't owe us anything. We owe him everything, including an apology. But don't worry, the news keeps getting better. Look at Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15. It says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. But we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." You see, Jesus came and he lived a life just like us, and he was tempted in every way, but he did not sin. And he did that because he wanted to go and live this perfect life so that his death on the cross meant life for us. And then he busted the grave wide open and he gave us life. And that is what we need to understand. God doesn't owe us anything. Anything else we get is just gravy. I mean, the life that we have for eternity is all that we don't even deserve it. I can't even say that. But he gives it freely. And Jesus understands our struggles. He understands your wants and your desires. He thirsted, he hungered, he saw things, but he did not sin. He did not cave in. So we could approach the throne of grace with confidence, with the throne of the Almighty with confidence and receive mercy and grace. You can enter freely and pour all this stuff at the feet of God because he understands, because what Jesus did for us. So we talked about with each week, and you may or may not remember these things, the relationship that opens up with guilt is an I owe you relationship. With anger, it's you owe me. And I'm angry because I didn't get something. Greed is an I owe me. And now jealousy is God owes me. But the antidote to guilt is confession. We talked about that the first week. The antidote to anger is forgiveness. The antidote to greed is giving generously. And jealousy requires celebration. The antidote to jealousy is celebration. That may seem weird, that may seem petty or small or trifling, but here's what I want you to begin doing. If you don't believe it, just try it and see what happens. Begin to celebrate the successes and the wins of other people. The people that you're most jealous of, start targeting them first. And that's going to be hard. Sometimes you may kind of have to grit your teeth and turn around and then go back to them and do it. But you need to start doing it. You need to start celebrating. Go big on celebrating the wins of other people. Celebrate in a big way. And it has to become a habit. It has to become a habit. It has to involve repetition. You cannot do it one time and expect jealousy to leave your heart forever. And you may be thinking automatically, what if I don't mean it? Celebrate anyway. Celebrate anyway. Are you saying, Bobby, that I need to be insincere? Absolutely not. If your friend looks good in that dress, tell her. I'm serious. If she doesn't, then you're off the hook. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to be insincere. Do you like your friend's car? Tell them. Tell them that you like the car. If not, no worries. You don't have to say anything. If your coworker did a great job on his presentation, but you find yourself wishing it was you, tell him he did a great job. Just don't tell him the part about you wish it was you. You know, you're being honest. You're telling them you like what they did, or you like what they have, or you like how they look. That's not insincere. It's just being honest. But here's something you have to do. If they did well and you can't bring yourself to compliment them, that's a problem. If somebody actually did a good job and you can't even bring it to yourself to say, good job, you did a great job, or this looks great, then you've got a problem, you've got an issue. And so when you congratulate people that you're envious of, you're not allowing dangerous emotions to control your behavior. And so you start to say the good things even when deep down you want to say the bad things, but you have to train yourself. And here's what Andy Stanley, the author of this book that most of the sermon series is based off of, what he says. It's much easier to behave your way into a new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of behaving. Did you hear that? It's much easier to behave your way into a new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of behaving. How many of you, just to illustrate this, how many of you have said, I want to lose some weight, I want to get in better health? And you just think about it. Did the pounds just melt off? No. You had to get out and walk when you didn't want to walk. You had to get out and eat right when you didn't want to eat right. You had to do the behavior, and then the mindset changes. And that's what we have to realize. Start looking for people to encourage. Start looking for people to encourage. Here's the thing. Eventually, your focus will change. Eventually, your focus will change. And everyone's victories will become so much sweeter, even yours. That's the thing that we don't realize. We don't even enjoy our own lives because we're so jealous of what other people have or don't have. And so when we start to celebrate other people, we're going to become more joyful in our own lives. So what are you missing today? What do you wish God had given you or wish God had taken from you? What are you longing for? Are you longing for acceptance from your boss that actually started with wanting acceptance from your father? Are you looking for fulfillment in your spouse or your boyfriend or your girlfriend that they'll never able to be truly, fully providing? Are you looking for success like you see in your neighbor's driveway? Are you looking for achievements on your kid's ball field? The question is, will you stop looking for fulfillment in all the wrong people, in all the wrong places, and start searching for it in your Savior? Do you want to be free to love today? If you want to be free, then there's nothing to do but to cast all your anxiety on Him. Cast all your worries, all your burdens, everything on Him. And if that needs to start with your relationship with Him, if you say, I don't even have my life surrendered to you, how can I surrender my jealousy? Then you got to start right there. You have to start with giving your life to Him. If you believe that He is a God who can fix it all, and you're willing to turn away from everything and lay it at His feet, confess Him as Lord, you can meet Him in baptism. He'll wash you clean. He'll give you a new life, and you can start fresh. And then day after day, when that jealousy wants to creep in, and that anger wants to creep in, and that guilt, and all these different emotions that want to control us try to creep back in, you say, not today, Satan, because I am washed in the blood of the Lamb. I am a child of the one true King. And you can be free today.